Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready hot, fresh, and fast. Whether it's lunch on the go, dinner with friends, or a full-on fiesta at home, Cafe Rio always brings the flavor and the fun. So what are you waiting for? We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. As always, happy to be back. I am happy to be back in Utah. Pennsylvania / West Virginia was a great time. I actually really enjoyed it. But just happy to be back, sleep in my own bed, that kind of stuff. Watching games on Mountain Time instead of Eastern Time. Y'all that have to do that out there, I don't know how you do it. Honestly, it's quite honestly the worst time to be a sports fan, just simply because you don't get you don't get sleep. Essentially, I'm one that always stays up late. I'm starting off on a tangent here, but I'm always one that stays up late. But man, it's tough when you go on the East Coast or Eastern Time Zone and you're trying to watch games and it's tough. I mean, it's nice in the sense that I work late into the hours of the morning. Early in the morning? I don't know what you're saying there, but so it's nice to be able to have games if you're just casually watching and you're not just putting on like the Food Network or something. But at the same time, like if you're trying to live or work out there, I mean that's tough to be able to have to do that. I had to first off, the Friday night I watched the TCU Arizona State game. That obviously got a little late. And then on Saturday, after everything I had to do with the Utah game, I had to stay up to edit the BYU Colorado game. And so it's tough. Normally that's not a big deal because you could sleep in the morning, but I had an earlier flight, not terrible, but earlier flight that going to bed at 3 a.m. is not ideal for. So, tough. I do have some sympathy for some Eastern time AP voters and having to wait up for the East Coast. So I can definitely see why some of that bias exists, knowing that you're probably not getting a lot of them staying up all night to watch that. So, learned a lot on this trip. It's not my first time, obviously, going into the Eastern time zone and watching games during the football season. But every time I do it, it just reminds me that not fun. So great side tangent as we start this episode. But obviously the mood is back. It's positive for Utah fans. Everybody is happy coming off of a dominant win. So we're gonna look into that. Kind of a little preview of today's episode. We're gonna talk about a little game time announcement that took place, AP Top 25 updates, and then we'll obviously recap Utah's trip to Morgantown. So we'll jump into that. So before we do that, let me tell you about our partners. Craving fresh, made from scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have them ready, hot, fast, and fresh. We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com. All right, we're gonna jump into this. It's a bye week for Utah. It begins the 6-week stretch where Utah doesn't leave the state. You do have road game in there with BYU, but you obviously stay in state for that. So Utah gets a 6-week stretch. Say that 6 times fast, 10 times fast. Just get another S in there to see what you can do. But they get this 6-week stretch where they don't have to leave the state. And whether that means anything or not, we'll find out. But obviously being able to sleep in your own bed, I know, they technically sleep in a hotel before the games, but being able to sleep in your hometown, get to do what you need to without having to worry about anything else, outside factors, worrying about that's a good thing. And so It's a tough stretch. There's a couple tough games in here, and there's ways where Utah can absolutely build some momentum or continue to just kind of have an up and down type season. So really fascinated to see how this goes. Utah will get a second bye in this stretch as well. But this first one comes at a great time for Utah, and we'll get into that shortly and why. I feel like a bye for Utah is always a good time. Some buys, I admittedly aren't great. I mean, you look at BYU's bye; they had it in week 3. I don't know that that's a great bye. Some teams have them later in the season, so I mean, it's worked out in Utah's favor the last decade or plus, where the bye has come at a decent time. So hard to disagree with that. So. Before we jump into all the game stuff, there was a game time announcement. As you know, generally every Monday there is a game time announcement. And this one is for the Arizona State game. This is the game coming off of Utah's bye, and this was a big one, obviously. Arizona State is the defending Big 12 champions. There's a lot of history between these two programs. Kenny Dillingham is a great coach and doing a lot of good things for that program. Sam Leavitt is a fantastic quarterback and is a real mismatch with, his star wide receiver in Jordan Tyson. We're going to talk about all that a lot more next week, but that game will kick off. Drum roll. I probably have a drum roll on here. We're going to test this out because I have never done this before. We just have this. Yeah, this is not a joke, so we need the drum roll on there. But my soundboard, it has some stuff, and I never use it because what am I using those for? But, it felt apropos to have a drum roll, and I didn't have it. I just had a rim shot. Maybe it's a joke. I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, the game time is at 8:15 p.m. Utah fans everywhere rejoicing. I don't know if everyone loves 8:15. I think they like night games, but 8:15 is a little late. But it's on ESPN at Rice-Eccles Stadium. This is going to be an electric scene, knowing that Utah's kind of back in that win column and the vibes are back up after a loss to Texas Tech. This is a great opportunity for Utah to really kind of showcase itself and help itself in the narrative that they're, quote unquote back. And so we'll get more into that. But, a great opportunity for this to be a fun little Pac-12 After Dark type reminiscence and seeing these two teams that, Kenny Dillingham in large respects has tried to model his program after what Kyle Whittingham did at Utah, mostly from the culture standpoint, trying to build something there, trying to create an environment that players want to come to, not just for money, but they want to come there and build something special. And you're seeing that definitely with him, and he's a great up-and-coming coach. Can we still call him up-and-coming now that he's, won a title? I don't know. Either way, I think he's going to be successful in this business for a long time. And, that's going to be a raucous environment that's going to be really entertaining. Utah fans have been clamoring for this night game opportunity, and you get it. And you get it against a good opponent that's going to mean something. Quite honestly, this has a real potential to have Big 12 title implications. There's outside influences here. Texas Tech, I think we can all agree, is probably going to be the favorite to get there. Iowa State has a pretty solid schedule, and they're undefeated right now. BYU is undefeated right now, and they have a favorable schedule as well. They obviously have to go through Utah, or Utah has to go through BYU, however you want to look at that. And so, there's some things that can be in Utah's favor, but picking up games like this against Arizona State are going to matter. And so this is going to be a fun environment, and it should be pretty exciting. Jason Pataki of the Salt Lake Tribune put out an article last week talking about kind of some stadium renovations and different things that they're hoping to do. And in there, it talked about how they're waiting to use a drone show for a night game. So I would have to imagine this is prime picking for that. I haven't heard anything. I haven't dug into that. But I think this is where Utah is going to try to show off at nighttime. Not that they didn't try to show off against Texas Tech. That crowd was electric, probably one of the louder crowds that I've seen. They were there early. You just don't get those nighttime vibes that everybody loves at Rice-Eccles Stadium. So, this will be a fun environment against top competition, and Utah should be well rested for that coming into that. So, look forward to that. I think that'll be a lot of fun. and the tailgating scene will be great. Fans will be happy because they can get their kids off to games, watch those games, and still get in. And it's good for me. I'll be up early in the morning, and that's part of it. But you don't care about me, and that's fine. You shouldn't. Moving to the AP Top 25, look, I don't want to spend too much time on this, and I generally don't like to spend a ton of time on this every week because it does matter, as I've pointed out in previous episodes. It does matter, but it's not something that is earth-shattering for anybody. So, especially with the fluidity of it right now, it's anybody's taking. So, Utah does not jump into the AP Top 25 despite a win. So there's at least a 2 to probably 3 week reprieve. You're going to have to beat Arizona State to probably jump in there. But crazier things have happened where Utah can get a bump on a bye week, but I wouldn't count on it. So basically what this is saying is Utah still needs to do some work. We're seeing that Utah is really dominant against bad teams, and they can do really well, but the only other use case that is out there is a bad performance against Texas Tech. And there's obviously nuances to that, and we've talked about that, and we don't need to revisit that, but Utah is unofficially at 27th, needs some work to do. And if you can show that, let's say against Arizona State, and then follow it up with BYU, that kind of stuff, that's where it's going to matter, right? It's proving it on the field, and then the rankings are going to follow. If you can get those wins, people can start believing in you again. And I think there's kind of tepid, love for Utah right now. I think you're seeing that this is a team that clearly has the dogs on offense to be able to do what they need to, but it's got to show up in the big games. There's that knock against Penn State over this last weekend where, they've invested all this money into the program, and, you expected this to be kind of the year, and you're still losing those big games, and it just didn't work that way. So Utah's kind of in a similar way, not quite in the same dramatic spheres. Penn State is much more a title contender than Utah is at this point. But you can see kind of the similarities in the sense of kind of how Utah's being viewed here. Like, is this a real deal, or are you just going in there and destroying bad teams? And as long as you play a bad team, this Utah team is going to be great, or is this something where you're going to have to fight a little bit more? And right now they're in the fighting category, still trying to prove, and I think that's a good position for Utah to be in, if you like that underdog mentality, which Utah loves. So it is what it is. Big 12. Rankings there, Texas Tech leads the conference at number 11. They were up from 12, and they were on a bye week. We're going to see really how they can handle the rest of the season. There's some real danger there of beating a team like Utah and just coasting. I don't get that sense from this Texas Tech team, but there's good teams in the Big 12. It's really easy to have an off night. As we've talked about, that game was much closer than the final score showed through 3.5 quarters. And so it's not to say that Texas Tech isn't beatable. Utah couldn't get it done. They clearly didn't have a great showing, and some of that is to Texas Tech's own doing. Some of that is Utah and Devin Dampier's injury and stuff like that. But this is one of those things where Texas Tech is beatable. I don't want to say that they're unbeatable, but they're clearly in the driver's seat. They clearly look like the best team on both sides of the ball, and it's going to take a strong effort from an opposing team to really kind of dethrone them or knock them out. But look, in this conference, if they get one loss, I mean, that can be devastating in this situation, especially if you have some of these teams that continue to roll the table. Iowa State has a favorable schedule, and if they stay undefeated, even if they may not get as tested against them, and I'd have to look at their full schedule to see, there's real possibilities that a one-loss team could be held out of the Big 12 title game. I don't know if that'll be the case, but you never know. I think there's things about this conference where it's been you're seeing some divide, but I don't know if there's as much parity in this conference this year as there has been or there was last year, in the sense that going down to the final wire, there's many more teams that were in contention. That's not to say that there isn't that this year. I still think there is to an extent, but I think you're seeing a little bit more of a tiered system. Obviously, Texas Tech being at the top of that, you could maybe throw in Iowa State there, but we'll see. Anyways, moving on with the AP, number 14, Iowa State, number 23, BYU, number 25, Arizona State. So you've got a ranked team now as your next opponent, assuming that they can continue to hold that. You're going to have a ranked opponent come into Rice-Eccles Stadium. And then receiving votes is Utah and TCU. TCU barely hanging on after their loss to Arizona State. That's a team, though, that I think is pretty solid. For whatever reason, in that second half, TCU just looked like a shell of itself from the first half. Josh Hoover just stopped playing quarterback. And look, Arizona State did a lot to that, right? Like, I get that there was adjustments made. So there was that being done. But he looked like a completely different QB. And so really, really curious to see kind of how TCU bounces back from this. I still think they're a solid team on both sides of the ball. But you lost a game to Arizona State, which is a good team itself. And so some work to do. So that's the AP. That's the game time decisions. Look, we're not going to get into those too much longer. We're already 15 minutes into this episode, and we want to recap this game. So let's jump into that. First off, Morgantown vibes. Quite honestly, and this is my uneducated view of this, I was not expecting Morgantown to be as big as it is. Now, with that said, it's not like some major metropolis by any means, but it's a much bigger city than I was expecting. Everything that I'd read or seen had just kind of felt like this really small, kind of like a Pullman, Washington vibe. Where it's fully embracing the college scene. Everything is surrounding the West Virginia type thing, but this is a much bigger area, a beautiful area that I really loved. I think people are sleeping on Morgantown. It gets, I don't even know if it's a bad rap, but it's people talk Morgantown. It's like, I don't want to travel there. I thought it was a great time, and I think if you get the chance to do that the next time Utah has to travel to West Virginia. Go for it. Honestly, it's a great opportunity. I think the tailgating scene there is probably one of the best that I've seen in all my travels. And more so, look, I went to Florida, right? Like I went to that game, and that tailgating scene's great. But the difference here with West Virginia, all of their tailgating lots are right directly in front of the stadium. So you had, which is also hilarious because you've got a hospital and a children's hospital that is the parking lot. And so essentially they kick out all of the parking for the hospital for the tailgating, which is wild. But talking to some West Virginia people, they have extra parking on the other side. They're not fully kicking off these people, but it's kind of wild to see that this entire hospital parking lot is essentially just full tailgate scenes with massive amount of people. Like it's just crazy amount. It's not just these little tents that, people are isolated. Everybody's moving around. Everybody's sharing. Everybody's doing all these great things. And it's a great vibe, honestly. And it gets you right into kickoff where the fans, the student section, they can go right from tailgating to inside the stadium within 5 minutes. And, it's just a great scene. The stadium itself is, quite honestly, I think it's perfectly built. It may be one of my favorite stadiums just from kind of the architecture side of things, in the sense of how that they've laid up their boxes, how they've laid up their students, how they've laid up everything, the field and its positioning. And I don't want to get too nerdy here with this, but I think it's just a great low-key scene that is being slept on. And I quite honestly wish that there was more at stake in this game and that West Virginia had a little bit more coming into this game, because I think it could have been a raucous scene. It could have been a really fun environment. I can see why teams that come into West Virginia, especially in a game that they feel matters, that can be a really difficult and daunting environment to get into, because those fans can get loud. We didn't really hear that. The fans, the students especially, they came in and filled in late and did their part, but the team did not back it up, and Utah was dominating and essentially left before halftime. And by halftime, the student section was pretty non-existent. So they had better things to do. Big tailgaters out there. The after party was not at the stadium. It was definitely elsewhere. And so, anyways, great Morgantown vibes. I think it's a great area. I would love to go back. Quite honestly, I think it was a great time. I hope that we get up there another time when the stakes are a little larger and that we get to see it fully raucous. I think it'll be fun. But anyways, Utah goes into Morgantown, comes away with a 48-14 win. Obviously a great showing. I think there's the research-backed, generally, notion of teams traveling to the Eastern time zone from out west, where it can be difficult, right? Like, it's just the body clocks are different. Things aren't easy. and it can be a difficult test for a lot of these teams, but Utah didn't show any of that. And that's not to say that it was all Utah. I mean, West Virginia is just not in a good position right now. Obviously injured, mostly on the offensive side of the ball, but defensively they were pretty healthy. But this is just a team that clearly just doesn't have it yet, at least against an opponent like Utah. And so, it was just not a good showing for them, and Utah took full advantage of it. But as we've seen in some of the games this year, Utah has started out slow, where they haven't had kind of that upper gear. They kind of just roll through things. I mean, that Wyoming game especially, they moved the ball really well and obviously got where they needed to, but had 3 points to show for it. That wasn't the case against this West Virginia team. Utah, very similarly to how they approached the UCLA game, came in with all the momentum. They had a game plan. They executed it pretty well. It wasn't flawless. There was definitely good things, and we're going to get into that. Looking a little into the deeper stats of this, but they executed to the point where they needed to. And 8 of the 9 total drives that the team had ended with a score. The only one that they didn't get was an interception that Devin Dampier had. It kind of slipped out of his hands. It was a little slippery conditions. Not excusing any of that, but it just it didn't work, and West Virginia took advantage of it, and that happens. But that was essentially the biggest flaw on Dampier. I mean, he had a great game and did well, and we'll get into that as well. But the offense moved the ball, and they had energy. They did what they needed to. 3 of the first 4 drives ended in a touchdown. That interception came in there on the 4th. And then 5 of their first 6 ended with a touchdown. Had a couple field goals in there before Bird Ficklin got a touchdown later in the game. So there's that. The biggest negative from this game is injuries. Quite honestly, especially that first half, it was a tough toll on Utah. Nate Ritchie, I think it's like the 2nd, 3rd, maybe 4th play. I mean, it's pretty early. He suffers an injury that leaves him not even being able to walk off the field. He tried to limp off after a while with teammates kind of holding him up, and eventually it was just clearly not going to happen. And they lifted him up, like a child and carried him. It just was not a great injury. It's just not great. Look, this hasn't been officially reported, and just as a side note, Kyle Whittingham's not doing his weekly presser today, and so we won't get a full update on that unless they release it to us. But the likelihood of Nate Ritchie playing football again this season is pretty unlikely. The likelihood is unlikely. Yeah. Anyways, it's unlikely. He's not going to play. After the game, he was in a full knee brace, big full leg knee brace, and was on crutches. I just don't see a world where he plays, assuming the worst there. 2 other big-time players, Jackson Benny and Dallas Vakalahi, also got injured. Benny had a catch and kind of got tackled weird. I didn't quite see it. Somebody said it was kind of a hip drop tackle, which is, been not allowed in the league, but if you don't see it, and I'm not saying it was that, I didn't see it, but he comes up hobbling. From all accounts, it sounds like he's going to be okay. I think it was more just there's no risk to put him back into the game, or there's more risk to put him back in the game. Just let him heal up. Utah was doing okay. You didn't need him on the field, but you do need him. Jackson Benny has quite honestly been one of the biggest stars of the team on both sides of the ball. His ability on the defense to kind of be a game player, a game changer, has been realized. He's still learning, right? There's still things where he'll admit that his eyes aren't where they need to be at times, or he's in the wrong position at times, but he's also got that instinct where he's just been pretty solid. So you need him to heal up. And then Dallas Vakalahi, who's obviously been banged up previously in this season. I don't know if it's a re-injured situation or, kind of if this is a new situation. I haven't been able to hear back from any on that one. But, he came off limping the field too and was taken to the locker room. You hope long-term that's not an issue. It didn't appear to be that, more just kind of another tweaking of an injury, but we'll see. Nakari Rogers, Wayshawn Parker kind of got banged up at times, but both came back into the game. I don't think there's anything of worry there that a bye week couldn't heal up. So outside of that, they should be pretty solid. So the biggest loss is probably to Nate Ritchie. The secondary not having Rabbit Evans in there, now Nate Ritchie not going to be in there. That's going to be really tough. And, Utah's going to have to find some players to be able to do that. Nate Tillman came in there, freshman, had some good things, had some not so good things at times, but it's a teach tape essentially for him. It's a great opportunity for him to get a full game of reps in there and now prepare for that. Now with that teach tape there on a bye week to prepare for Arizona State, which is going to be a tall test. We're going to see how that goes. But injuries are probably your biggest concern. It's not quite to the levels yet where Utah's in DEFCON 1, but at the same time, it's stacking and it's not been good. And the biggest worry is at the safety position, and it's already a position group or the secondary in general that's had a little bit of troubles trying to maintain what they do there, but it also hasn't been as bad as people think too. The biggest issue really has just been tackling for Utah. So we'll get into that later. This is a bye week. We'll hopefully get into maybe a little deeper numbers or assessment of the team later this week. But yeah. The biggest difference here, though, is the diversity in the offensive play calling, as well as just starting with energy. This was, like I said, similar to that UCLA game where they just came out jumping, right? Like they came in looking like they wanted to win. It wasn't just trying to go through the motions. This Utah team knew that West Virginia probably wasn't in the same level of competition as Utah, right? Like it'd be real easy to come in here and just say we got the win. But they came out there with something to be said. It was a statement, and part of that is because they lost the week before. But we've seen Utah kind of mess around with their food again the week after. They let the loss linger, and things kind of go sideways early on. But this Utah team clearly did not have that mentality. The Devin Dampier said he used it as fuel to have that loss, and I think you're seeing that from a lot of these other players. Like it sucked, and looking at the players and talking to the players last week, it hurt, right? Like losing that Texas Tech game absolutely hurt. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but you see them completely different moving into this. And I think, as I mentioned last week on the podcast, it was the biggest thing for this team to be able to have a win this week, just to go into the bye week without issues. Years past, Utah's gone into this bye week with more to clean up, and it's really easy to kind of let those feelings linger, right? Instead of the 24 or 48-hour rule that Utah kind of allows these players to kind of sit on their last stuff, that kind of snowballs in the bye week where now it's a little bit longer, and you've got weeks to think about it, and you're not as sharp because you're doubting yourself. The confidence isn't as high. This for everything gives Utah a much better point of emphasis moving forward, right? You still have to take those steps, right? You still have to come out and have the energy. You still got to execute at a high level. But I think going into the bye week, there's that little extra pep in your step, knowing that like, hey, we are a good team. We can do this. And so I think that more than anything is going to bode well for Utah. They still, once again, they have a tough Arizona State team on the docket next. But I think having that kind of mentality before Arizona State helps. Last week I said it was an inflection point, and I truly believe it. I think Utah passed that initial test and are moving forward. So the real question is, and maybe it's still premature, but the question is Utah back, right? Like that's the biggest question everybody wants to know. Is Utah back? Were they ever gone? Did they have what it takes to be able to be a contender in the Big 12? I still think that they do. And so is back really something there? I don't know, right? Like, are they back compared to last year? Yeah, obviously. Like they're a completely different team than they were last year. Nuanced, obviously, but completely different team. But even compared to what they did against Texas Tech, this is a team that knew what their weaknesses were, or at least where they didn't execute efficiently, and did that, right? Like, and obviously, the level of competition between Texas Tech and West Virginia is not the same, but you had a much different mindset going into that. Even in that Texas Tech game, it still felt like Utah was not really going into this with this right mindset of energy, which I understand to people seems wild, but there's just kind of things lagging. I think learning that Devin Dampier was injured kind of obviously impacted that. Him not getting 2.5 days of reps with the team just throws things off, right? And so you're not clicking at your best, knowing that you've been hampered by that. And so I think there's a real mentality going into this that everything was clicking going into that point. You saw that last year with the up and down of, is Cam playing, is Isaac playing, who's playing, where it was a challenge to not know who was starters. And so there wasn't a lot of consistency in how that team was able to approach game week. They you can say the right things and do the right things, but when you don't have kind of that confidence going into the game just because you haven't had those reps, it becomes a challenge. This week looked completely different. Utah looked confident, and they backed it up, and they also changed. I wouldn't even say changed the playbook, but they embraced more of kind of what this team is able to do. So looking at it, first off, there was several big-time plays, and big-time plays can mean different things. In the passing game, it's generally about 15 yards. In the run game, it's usually about 10 yards. And Utah in totality had 15 big-time plays according to the official stats. So they had 6 passing plays that were big-time, 5 of those coming from Devin Dampier and 1 coming from Bird Ficklin. And then there was 9 runs that were considered big-time plays. So collective effort, I mean, when I've talked to you about those explosive plays that those stats are tracking, those are them, right? That's essentially it. You're getting plays that are going to make a difference. They're when you look at value of a play, those are much more valuable than, the 2 yards or whatever it may have you in a standard game. And so you need a lot of those, and the fact that they had 15 combined shows that they were somewhat balanced on both sides of the split pass and run, but they were effective in what they did. So looking at this, they had 532 total yards, second highest of the season. Wyoming was just a little higher at 541. But the optimism about this game versus Wyoming is far different, right? There's 290 passing yards, which is the highest output in the passing game this season. Is there a correlation there? I'll let you decide. 243 rushing yards, which is the second lowest of the season, the lowest obviously being against Texas Tech. But it kind of shows how important that passing game can mean to Utah. And I'll jump into those numbers here shortly in a more of advanced settings to do that. But Utah was 8 of 13 on third downs. Good, but not great. I mean, it's good. Don't get me wrong. But it wasn't as good as they have been at times, but it was still a good number. The bigger stat there is they were 3 of 3 on fourth down. So any inefficiencies that they had on third down, they made up for it on fourth down. Everything was good. Average yards per play was 6.9. That's a solid number. And then they were 7 of 7 in the red zone. So, a solid effort all around. Utah did really well. The biggest difference here, though, is the emphasis in the passing game. We saw against Texas Tech that they sold out on the run, right? They knew that Utah was going to try to establish the run. They were going to try to do everything that they could to make sure that Utah couldn't get that. And then any of the passing that Utah had shown up to that point was at best short to behind the line of scrimmage, whether it be screen passes or these quick dump-off passes, out route type passes that were for short gains. Texas Tech knew that they could sell out and do that. And, there were times that Dampier beat them, but you had a penalty or, something else happened, and it didn't work against Texas Tech. But the reality is Utah didn't really scheme towards that. There wasn't a huge diversity in the playbook of what they were able to do. And obviously some of that needed to be set up. You had to kind of, a game isn't just you go out there and they need to start throwing the ball, right? You got to set up some of that stuff, right? But against Texas Tech, they were never able to set up anything. You start your first series with a 3-and-out, clearly in a world of hurt to start. It's a much better defense, and so that's going to happen, right? You see the Oregon-Penn State game. There was 3 quarters of nothing. It was just kind of a bad game, and bad being there wasn't offense, right? That's how that game kind of played out for 3 quarters, and then Texas Tech decided to just kind of put the stamp on the game, and it is what it is. Utah in this game, against still a solid defense, it's not to the level of Texas Tech, but a solid defense, they had their way. And they did what they needed to. They found an efficient passing game. They went to it early. The first drive, they had several plays that were some of those big time throws. They weren't messing around with it. They weren't doing anything that was going to cause problems in terms of of trying to let West Virginia get into a rhythm. This was just all Utah. I mean, that first drive, there were 7 passing plays out of the 12 plays. You had a 20-yarder, an 11-yarder, a 14-yarder. Buchanan had a 7-yard touchdown. Was it a touch? Yeah, I think it was. No, he had a 7-yarder. You had 2 incompletions. One was to Benny, one was to Merriweather. They could have had them. They slipped out. It wasn't much there, but there was a big emphasis in passing in that game, and it benefited Utah. They found a lot of success there. You got a lot of players involved. Ryan Davis, Dallin Bentley, J.J. Buchanan, 3 of the guys that had the most targets that were efficient. Ryan Davis, man, he's really stepped up. Not that he hasn't stepped up at all, but he's a guy that has been really solid for the Utes. Everybody kind of looks at him as not this prototypical wide receiver 1, and the reality is he's that guy. Right? He's done it. He catches the ball efficiently. He was 100% in his targets. I'd have to go back and look, but I don't know of many that he's dropped this year. If you get it to Davis, he's generally going to catch it. And obviously he and Dampier have this great chemistry. They've been playing together. Dampier talked about it at the end of the game where these two came up together, right? Before Dampier was even a starting QB, these two were throwing to each other at New Mexico. And so there's just this natural chemistry that's developed between these two. Dampier knows exactly what Davis is going to do. Davis knows exactly what Dampier is going to do. And it's been a great opportunity for Utah. He finishes with 107 yards, 1 touchdown on 7 receptions. He had a 32-yarder that, was his longest. Great showing from Ryan Davis, and that's exactly what they need from him. But beyond that, you spread the ball to Dallin Bentley, who also had a 100% catch radius, was targeted 5 times, didn't miss. He's been a key element for Utah, just really taking, his responsibilities and running with it. Had 59 yards, also a touchdown, had a 21-yarder. Just a solid play from the tight end position. And then J.J. Buchanan, you're starting to see him kind of get more comfortable and starting to get him in the system. He's getting that chemistry with Dampier, and it's benefiting Utah. He's a bigger bodied guy. Obviously, they moved him into the tight end room at times to kind of counter for that. But you're seeing him just kind of be on that fringe of he can be a wide receiver, he can be a tight end, he can kind of mix it up and do what he needs to. And he's been solid for Utah. And so I'm curious to see how he continues to develop. But he gets 32 yards and a touchdown. He had 1 drop, but, he was pretty lights out for this team. And so you had 3 receivers, that accounted for roughly 200 yards between them and didn't have any problems. Now, whatever the problem is with Merriweather and Dampier, I'm not saying that there is a problem, but for whatever reason, those two haven't been able to sync up. And I know everybody wants Merriweather to be that guy, to be the wide receiver 1. He's quick. He's got the intangibles, meaning the height. He can get the 50-50 balls is what we've heard. But for whatever reason, we just haven't gotten in sync with those two. I don't know if Merriweather is trying to date Dampier's sister. Does Dampier even have a sister? I don't even know. I'm just teasing, obviously. But these two just have not been in sync, and it hasn't worked very well yet. Really curious to see if they can get a chemistry, if they can get in sync, what that could mean. I think if you have Merriweather added into that list of the 3 that I mentioned, that really helps Utah. Larry Simmons is another guy there that needs to get involved, but it's not for the lack of trying. There was at least 2 plays that as I'm watching from the press box, I was telling other media he's got to go to Simmons right there. Simmons, wide open, had a lot of space, and Dampier just didn't see him. One in particular that Devin, I would say, made the wrong decision and tried to get extra yards through the run. He wasn't necessarily looking to run the entire time, but it just broke down and he didn't see Simmons, and or he didn't trust that he could get it to Simmons where he was at, and went for the run instead. But outside of that, there really wasn't many. But you're seeing that if he could make those throws, Simmons is a guy that is getting available. It's still a combination with Dampier and the wide receivers, but it's just building that connection and making it work. So, really curious to see in this off week, if they can kind of continue that connection, start building into that, if they can kind of start introducing a little bit more of Simmons and Merriweather, if they can, there's not really a concern with this team in the passing game. That's not to say that it can't get worse. I mean, well, Texas Tech was worse, but it's not to say that it's always going to be successful. But I think you have to like what Utah can do if you can establish more, targets that can be the guy. And it gives Dampier a little bit more chemistry and connectedness to other guys, and we'll see. So far, definitely a passing grade on that this week. It hasn't been that way in past weeks outside of, some throws to Ryan Davis and Dallin Bentley, but you're starting to see maybe an evolution of them being a little bit more explosive there and testing the waters in the passing game. So looking at kind of what this meant to the team using some advanced stats, I hope to make some of these a little regular on here, as I've mentioned in some of the previews, but looking at pass explosives. So passing plays that were considered big, or yardage that mattered a ton. When we look at this is essentially an evaluation of kind of field position, where they were, what kind of points were added to how they did it. Now, in this game, Utah recorded a season high in pass explosives at a 1.68. So that's essentially, they added 1.68 points value to kind of what they were doing, which is pretty solid. I mean, most teams passing points are going to, there's value there, right? Like, passing is just kind of a more valuable play. And so that's there. But this was a season high by a large margin. For example, UCLA, which everybody kind of looks to as kind of the standard of how Utah's offense needed to run, obviously wasn't super pass heavy, but it was a 1.08 against UCLA. Let me remind you, 1.68 against West Virginia. Those little fractions of points matter, right? Meaning just you're adding more value to your field out there. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but you're essentially just adding more value. Against Cal Poly, it was 1.23. That was the high going into this game. Wyoming, 1.14, and Texas Tech, obviously a low at 1.03. So there wasn't a ton of value, but you're in that game, right? This game, there was a ton more value to what the passing game showed. There was explosive plays. They were doing well. It meant they were moving the ball down the field. That's essentially what it is. The pass success rate, you've heard me talk about that as well. 50% on, second down, 70% on third down, 100% on fourth down, that kind of stuff. They were 68% versus West Virginia. That's the second highest all year. West Virginia, or the UCLA game, was the highest at 70%. And then it took a drastic drop at Cal Poly at 47%, Wyoming 44%, Texas Tech an incredible low at 35.7%. Just this decline since that UCLA game, but Utah did well to jump right back to that and got 68% success rate against West Virginia. That's huge, right? That you're converting essentially your required plays 70% of the time. I mean, you're going to win ball games that way, right? Then looking at the predicted points added. So this is another one of those, looking at where you are on the field and kind of adding value to what you do. Utah got another season high here against West Virginia. They added 0.75 points added to kind of where they were in the field. The next closest was UCLA at 0.62. The other three games, Cal Poly, Wyoming, and Texas Tech, were not great. It was 0.27 for Cal Poly, 0.2 for Wyoming, and Texas Tech was 0.12, which shows like you just weren't moving the ball, right? Like you weren't adding any value, you weren't adding any point value to what you were doing, which it shows, right? What the stats are basically telling you is that Utah was not being aggressive. So all of that, if you don't like the numbers stuff, basically it's just saying Utah was not aggressive in the passing game, and it showed, and it wasn't beneficial to them. Against West Virginia, they were aggressive. They pushed it. They enhanced value, in their situation. If you're buying stock in this, you bought it at a time where it was low and everything was really low, and you suddenly shot up to an incredibly high value that was the highest that you've ever seen. That's essentially the value that Utah's providing in these types of things. And so it's a great situation for Utah to be able to work with. Real quickly, a couple other things here in passing down. So Passing downs are considered second downs with 7 or plus yards, or third or fourth down yards with 5+ yards. In kind of the layman's terms of that, that's just essentially a play where you would expect a pass play, right? A run there isn't going to ever add value. You may be conceding things, or you may, be trying to look up or set up other things. But in a passing down, how did Utah do? In that same category, Utah's explosives was 1.75, the second highest of the season. Its success rate was 73.3, the highest, and its PPA, so predicted points added, was 1.3, and that was the highest by a largest margin. In passing down, so the plays that everybody is expecting you to pass, Utah was incredibly efficient and effective. That means something, right? That shows that even in the times where the defense knew what you were doing, you had your way with it. Now, the interesting thing here is standard downs. These are downs that are they're not considered passing plays. So the opposite of anything that I said. Utah didn't execute as well on those in the passing. They were much more efficient in the plays that you expected them to pass. So, we're not getting into that. Conversely, the run game from a stats perspective wasn't anything special in this game. West Virginia actually did really well in stopping the run. They brought the highest opponent stuff rate to Utah at 26.5%. That's like double many other opponents. Even Texas Tech didn't have, Sorry, I screwed that up. I read that reverse. Utah actually, hold on, let me pull this up because I'm screwing this up. I want to make sure that I'm saying the right thing. Sorry about this, doing this live on... This is not great podcasting. Okay, so for example, let's see. Sorry, yes, I said that backwards. So against Texas Tech, Utah's stuff rate was 7.7%. Against West Virginia, it was 26.5%. But at the same time, they forced the lowest power success rate, meaning like they weren't able to get those short yardage downs that they needed to. It was the second lowest rate in success rate in the run game. This was a West Virginia defense that did pretty well at stopping the run. It was just the passing game didn't work. And so you can see maybe the mindset of what West Virginia was trying to do. They were trying to take the Texas Tech blueprint and see what they could do to stop the run, and did fairly successful on it. Utah still managed to do really well. I mean, you're rushing for over 200 yards shows that it wasn't like a completely great effort. But they tried to move forward and do what they needed to, and Utah still fought through that and found a way to win. Wayshawn Parker, and the point that I'm making there is the passing provided way more value, and because that they put that on kind of their emphasis, Utah was able to exploit that and was effective in being able to move forward and do what they needed to. So that's why passing was so efficient there. Wayshawn Parker, though, ends with 66 rushing yards. He's averaging 7.3 yards, and he only had 9 carries. Now, this is where I know some people are really frustrated by that. They want him to be able to have more, and you can make a case for that. He ran one for 40 yards. I mean, this is a guy that is clearly finding his opportunities, but I think it's just part of this whole collective effort of what Utah is trying to do, and so putting him in there for just a few carries isn't the end of the world, right? One, you're keeping him fresh, and two, you've got another guy that's been able to be pretty solid as well in N'Kerry Rogers, who had 61 yards, so similar production, a little less of an average, 4.7 yard average on 13 carries, but he just had more. So either way, you've got two guys that are in there in the mix and doing a lot of different things. They've been able to fight through it. Parker did get a receiving touchdown. If that's the type of plays that I think are going to be very effective for Utah to show on tape, simply because you've got Dampier now rolling out and looking like he's going to run, and then when that DB comes in to try to tackle him or stop the run, suddenly you now have an open man. And so I think you've got some of those things that are now on tape and are going to be very beneficial for the run game as well as the passing game. And so, this was just kind of a collective effort of what Utah needed to do, and I think it's pretty solid that's what you need to do to find success. So, hopefully you've stuck through that point. Let me take a break real quick to tell you about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. At Canyon View Credit Union, it's on the house. Close a mortgage and get a free appraisal up to $600. To learn more details or apply, visit Canyon View CU. All right, as we end this episode, let's take a little look at kind of some of the other players. So Devin Dampier had one of his most efficient days as a Utah player, or even in his career. I'm not going to pretend like I know all of what he did at New Mexico, even though I've looked at the stats a million times. But this was just a standout performance by the QB. He was 21 of 26, so 81%. For those that don't want to do the math, for 237 yards. He threw for 4 touchdowns. He did have the 1 interception, but was really solid in what he did. Had 33 rushing yards, also had a touchdown on the ground on 11 carries. So he didn't have to run a ton. That's quite honestly the number that they've been getting him to roughly, is about 10 to 11, 12 type carries a game, but contributes 5 total touchdowns in a game and was completely different than the week prior against Texas Tech. You can see that having a full week of practice helped him. It helped the team, and you saw what he was able to do. There wasn't, he had 5 incompletions, and 2 of those were honestly just drops by his receivers. It was wet early, and so I don't know how much that factored into it. But, I mean, if he's 23 of 26, I think that kind of shows the level of play that he can be at. And look, I get it. West Virginia is not Texas Tech. But I think if you give him time and he's got preparation and he's healthy, this is a really solid quarterback that's able to do what he needs to. Are there things that he needs to improve on? 100%. I mentioned the Larry Simmons throws. There's different things that he needs to do. He's still, I would say he doesn't have the best depth in terms of what he's able to throw. You give him intermediate or short routes and he's got you. He still has to develop a little bit more power on those deeper throws, not lofting the ball too much. But he's finding success that way. There's throws. That throw he made to Jackson Benny in the Texas Tech game shows that he's capable of it, right? And he can put it on the dime, put it in the breadbasket. He can do what he needs to. And so I think if you continue to give him more confidence, he's a confident guy. He's a fun-loving guy that has a lot of fun playing. But if you can keep giving him more confidence and the coaching staff confidence in him, not that Beck doesn't have that, but the more you kind of get into that freedom, you're going to see an unlocked player who understands what he can do, and you start getting into the depth of his talent. That bodes well as you're getting into these games against Arizona State, against BYU especially, where it's going to be a really hostile environment. It's going to be a place where he's got to be on the top of his game. And if you can start stacking these performances and not have Texas Tech on there and knowing kind of the nuances behind that, it gives a QB a ton of confidence knowing what they can do. It gives a coaching staff a ton of confidence knowing what they can do. And all that is beneficial going into these things. So really curious to kind of see his development as the season progresses. This week and next week will be vital in healing up, obviously. He looks healthy, but also building that connection with his receivers. If they go into this bye week and just kind of coast and don't have that mental edge to push forward against Arizona State, you're going to see a regression, right? For Dampier, he's got to continue to push. He's got to continue to get those wide receiver connections down, continue to find ways to get that little edge against the opponent. And I think Utah can be okay. Are they fully there yet? We'll see, right? Like we don't know. We still have to see Arizona State. We still have to see BYU. We still have to see these tougher games and see where they're at. But where it's at, you have to like what Dampier brings to this offense. Now, behind him, Bird Ficklin is an electric athlete. And it's crazy to see a guy that just has the it factor behind a guy that has the it factor, if that makes sense. Like, it's not that common at Utah to have that. The backup QB position has not been the greatest position for Utah over the years. And yet you can start to see the makings of what could be a special player in Bird Ficklin. Now, he's still young. He's still not being put in situations that are fully tested, right? Like, there's still, garbage time minutes, but at the same time, he's executing very well in what he's done. And it's not like West Virginia threw in the towel. That defense was still trying to fight to the very end. Their offense was rolling a little bit more at the end when they switched to their second backup or the original backup of the day, whatever. It's another quarterback. We'll just say that. So they were fighting, right? Like, this is a West Virginia team that wasn't trying to just give up and throw in the towel, and Bird Ficklin executed really well. He was another week of being perfect, 4 of 4 for 53 yards and a touchdown. He's looking confident out there. He's got kind of control of the offense and the trust of the coaching staff, where it would really be easy for them to just say, hey, Ficklin, go in there. We're going to, run the ball every single down, a staple that Kyle Whittingham has generally been a part of. Maybe he's buying into a little bit more of style points. Maybe they're just honestly trying to test Ficklin. I think there's some of that. But you saw an offense that wasn't really trying to take a step back, right? They were trying to still execute at a high level. Bird Ficklin executed it at a high level, and they finished with another touchdown. And I think he's 100% in what he's done in touchdown drives. And so this is a guy that is being really effective with what he does. You have to like where he's moving. When I talked about Dampier not having the zip on the ball in those deep passes, Ficklin does. I mean, the guy just has a cannon of an arm, and he's able to get that out there. So really curious to see what happens. Kyle was really complimentary of Ficklin and excited to be able to have a full quarter of reps to be able to give him. Those mean something, right? Like, that's what Utah was hoping to have with Isaac Wilson last year, where they could give him these supplemental reps, give him some introductory game experience stuff to kind of get the timing down, get your feet wet type thing. That's what they're getting with Ficklin, and I think it's going to pay dividends in the future. Now, some of that means Utah's going to have to pay him to keep him, but I think if you can continue to make that progress with Ficklin, it's going to pay massive dividends for him in the future, assuming that, he's the guy that they go to. Whether Dampier leaves after this year or stays, if you can continue to get those reps, Utah's in a pretty solid position, especially with the offense that they're running, where they wouldn't necessarily have to take a step back. We still need to see him in more tested situations, right? It's really easy to be the backup QB and be the most popular person because, you can go out there and kind of not have those same expectations and be the guy that can just go have fun. But he's doing it, right? Like, he's got confidence. He's got the coach's confidence, and things are going well there. Outside of that, a couple players that I think really, really stood out. Number one being Daniel Bray. Man, there was a moment. So I was sitting next to Steve Bartle, and the first run that Bray had, he had this little jump cut where he just changed speed. Well, he didn't change speed. He was still at 100 miles per hour, it felt like. But he had this like such quick movement to him where it was just impossible to tackle, where it was this noticeable moment. And the two of us just kind of reacted in the same way, like, oh, okay, this guy is legit. And, I think you're seeing a guy that is completely different from what Utah has right now, where if they can maximize his talent, there's no reason you shouldn't put Bray in there. And Kyle Whittingham mentioned that in his post-game press conference. He says, we've got to find a way to get Bray factored in there more. I don't know if that means, put him in a jet sweep type situation. Oh, man, he would be, with the blockers that Utah has, and put him in a jet sweep. I mean, that could be a really dangerous game where if you give him, any green grass, he's gone. I truly believe that he's got that speed that is just untouchable. And he's not going to be your bruising back, right? Like, he's not going to get in there and try to do what Wayshawn Parker or Nakari Rogers are doing. But if you give him that space, that freedom to be able to just go, use his speed, he could be an incredibly talented and dangerous player for Utah, especially in this offense. With a guy like Hunter Andrews out for the season, I could see them relying a little bit more on Bray. Not that they're the same positions or what they do, but I think you're trying to find those skill players, right? Smith Snowden's kind of been that guy, but they've lessened his role a little bit. Maybe you put Bray in Smith's role and let him go on the secondary where they really need him, and so keep him there. But I think you're seeing the emergence of Bray, and I'm really curious to see how Utah factors him in these next few weeks. If you have that on tape and you don't use him, why? And I'm curious what would happen. I'm not saying like Utah did him wrong in these first few games by not playing him, but I think now that you've seen it, it shows that there's probably a reason that he needs to get on the field. So there's that. And then lastly, I mentioned him a little bit, and Nate Tillman, really impressed with kind of what he was able to do in his opportunity in the secondary. There's still a lot of freshman moments there, but the fact that he got a full game essentially of being able to learn, as I said earlier, the teach tape, this is going to bode well for him. That doesn't mean that he's suddenly going to be a finished product when they go into Arizona State. But I think if you can give him the opportunities that he got on Saturday, that's going to bode well for Utah. But I think you see kind of the instincts that he has, the ability that he had. There was one tackle that he missed that was, it was pretty bad. More so out of position than anything. But there's things there where you can see the promise and the excitement that is there. And it's just a matter of him, once again, I use the word stacking, but if you can continue to stack those performances and do well, that bodes well for Utah, not just this year, but for years to come. So, a lot of talented players that are in behind them, but we'll see. And quite honestly, I've spent most of the time here talking about offensive players. He's like the only defensive player that I talked about, but there's so many defensive players that need to be highlighted as well. I hope that I can do some of that on Thursday or whenever I do the second episode of this week. But there's a lot going on, and I think there's game players in this defense that deserve to be highlighted as well, including John Henry Daly. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you stuck with this. There's a lot of numbers in there, a lot of recaps of that, but I think it all goes to the point that Utah needs to be more energetic. That sounds crazy, but even Devin Dampier talked about that at the end of the game, just the emphasis to be more energetic. That goes a long way. Then you mix that with that diverse playbook, being able to have a little bit more of an emphasis in the passing game, and I think this Utah team can be pretty solid. So we'll see what that means moving forward. Is Utah back or not? I think it's still a little too early, but at the same time, I think Utah is showing that they're a really solid team. You don't just beat up a team like that on the road if you're not a solid team, but you've got to back it up against good competition. So with that, we'll sign off for today, and we'll get back to this again later this week, try to go a little deeper on some of these things, try to kind of do an assessment of the team at this point, 5 games into the season. We're almost halfway done with the season, which is kind of crazy. So, we'll get into that and have fun with it. But enjoy your bye week. Go watch some other games, and go get some yard work done. I have to go do that. The chores are kind of stacking, so I got to do that this week too. But with that, we'll sign off today, and we'll get back to you later this week. Have a good one. Adios.